So I have a question to you guys. Besides the expensive equipment, what other commonalities do you think fishing and street photography have?
Patience.
Patience.
You know your final goal. You want to catch something.
You want to catch something?
And you're completely focused to it. And if it's a
Completely.
fish or a subject, that's what you're aiming for.
What is the most disappointing thing as a fisherman?
Catching nothing.
Yeah.
Rotten fish.
That there's no fish, right? So I think the best street photographers and fishermen are the patient ones.
Yeah.
You could be the most skilled fisherman or photographer in the world, but if you don't have luck, you're not going to catch any fish. So I think the same thing also happens in photography and street photography is that you have to teach people to be patient. But one technique I love in street photography is called the fishing technique. So, you know, when you go fishing, you put on the boat and then maybe have a cup of coffee. So you have to be patient. So the same thing applies in street photography is that you see a nice scene, a nice background, and then you'll take the camera and you'll just wait and then wait for people to enter the scene. And practical tips is, you know, if people are shooting with manual lenses, like a shooting with like M, my suggestion would be tell them to keep the ISO really high, like ISO 1600, and pre-focus the lens to about 5 meters to infinity. And for them to essentially just be waiting for the subjects to enter the scene. The good thing that also works well in the fishing technique, especially if you're using like a Leica M or a rangefinder, is because you can see outside the viewfinder. So you can see people before they enter the scene. So when you guys are looking at this image,
It's interesting because I would have taken that image without the girl, probably. I would see this maybe and then take it, but if you now take the girl away, it's less exciting or whatever.
what do you think works in terms of the composition?
The lines.
Yeah.
The lines and that she's walking into the scene instead of out.
And she has her legs like this. This is the moment when
Yeah.
she has in the same line as the stairs and the pillars.
They're all in as well, and your eye is always attracted to the lighter part. In this case, the lily.
The vignetting is working also.
Yeah, push it more to the last part.
Yeah, no, you guys are absolutely correct. And this is also a pro tip is when you're shooting the fishing technique in street photography, if you wait and see people enter the scene, wait for the legs to split in the leg. Because
I remember that from your
it creates
Yeah.
two nice diagonals.
Yeah.
It also creates a nice triangle composition. And even one quote I love about Henri Cartier-Bresson, like, you know, our godfather of photography, composition must be one of our constant occupations, preoccupations, but the moment of shooting, it could only stem from intuition. For when we go out to capture the fugitive moment, all the interrelationships involved are on the move. So it just means that when you're shooting street photography, always think about the composition of the leading lines waiting for the background.
Okay.
But ultimately, when you're shooting composition, it has to come from your gut. One thing that Henri Cartier-Bresson did, that I also do now, is that when I take a nice picture like this, I want to ask myself, I like the picture and I think it's a good picture, but why is it a good picture? So my sister Annette Kim did was, and this is super cool, she essentially started to analyze the image, right? So you see here outlined in yellow, these are all the leading lines, right? And other things for you guys to notice too, one technique in photography and street photography, and this is why the fishing technique works well, is repetition.
Okay.
Or, any of you guys like to listen to music?
Yeah.
Yes.
Rhythm.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of analogies they use in music could also be applied to photography. So like in photography, like black and white, the tones of the image, the rhythm of the images, the beats. So even here, like boom, 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 boom. You can see all these nice leading lines here too. And this is actually the really cool thing that what my sister did was, you could kind of see how visually all these leading lines track your eyes and give you movement in the scene. Because what you're trying to do with composition and street photography, the best pictures are the ones that are simple, like simple background, nice leading lines, but dynamic, so allows for movement. Also, what she started to do too is one of my favorite artists is Pierre Mondrian. And he, you guys know Pierre Mondrian, right?
Sure.
The guy who just went upstairs probably.
I've got all his paintings.
He's
Dutch.
Oh, Mondrian.
yeah,
Oh,
Mondrian.
I didn't understood it.
Oh, Pierre
Because of the
Mondrian.
accent.
Yeah. So he, like most people don't know that Pierre Mondrian was actually a very good painter. He knew how to paint in real life.
Yeah.
So what he would do is he abstracted his images into these sort of boxes, and what my sister started to do was taking these compositions, making it more and more abstract, and then
You'll make your own Mondrian.
making your own version of Mondrian.
Oh.
Oh! Oh! So, and then this is her ultimate image.
Cool.
Alright.
So you could kind of see that in street photography, you could really make art, and often we look at pictures, we're not sure why the composition is good, but I do believe that there are certain fundamental principles to make a powerful image. So when it comes to shooting street photography, that's probably one of the best tips I could give to you guys in terms of composition, is to look for the leading lines. Another cool thing I want to start having you guys do
Oh shit.
is to start thinking of the world graphically. So these are tons of these little images that I've personally done in terms of trying to analyze and understand why does a certain composition work. And to me, it's all about proportion. Generally, the thing that's interesting with photography is that you're looking through a frame. You're looking through a 3x2 box. And what you could do with a box is very interesting. And ultimately, what you're trying to do in photography and composition is you're trying to add movement. The best composition technique, you guys could tell your clients this, or you could apply this to your own photography. Generally, most photographers follow the rule of thirds.
Yeah.
But the problem with the rule of thirds is that it's not dynamic enough. Diagonal lines are much more dynamic than horizontal and vertical lines. And you can see, all you have to do is draw a line from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, then draw a perpendicular line, so there's 90 degree here. Then your eye is kind of tracked and drawn to this area. And you could draw this in all the different directions, but for me, like, I'm a quite simple person. I like to kind of make it simple. So generally when I'm composing my scenes, if you're photographing somebody, a practical tip too is when you're taking pictures, just tilt your camera a little bit. Tilt your camera. Yeah, tilt your camera and what you, like, so for example, let's say you're taking a photo of your sexy girlfriend at the beach. And she's lying there and she's like stretching out one leg, right? So if you think about the picture, you can tilt your camera and try to get one of her legs fitting this diagonal here. And then what you can just do is just try to get her face here. So I like to think in composition, you want to kind of keep it simple.
Okay.
Because there's so many more complex ways you guys could do this. Probably the most basic thing is don't center your subject. Keep them off a little bit. And it's actually funny because tilting your camera and shooting photos, they actually call this the Dutch angle.
Oh really?
Really? But even funnier, it's actually a mistranslation because it's supposed to be the Deutsche angle, like the
Deutsche
German
angle,
angle. Because a lot of German filmmakers did it. But, you know, some Americans were like, oh, Deutsche, Dutch? So anyways, and you could see that all these principles that are applied to photography in terms of the proportions, you can see there's so many different ways you could chop up the rectangle. And obviously you don't have to see these things when you're shooting.
That's cool. Right?
But it's something that I personally like to draw and sketch. So if you take in the golden rectangle I showed you guys earlier, there's that intersecting point, you could do it in all the different areas. And you could also notice, do you guys know the Fibonacci spiral?
Yeah.
It also kind of matches there too, right? And there's lots of mathematical formulas. To be honest, I don't understand any of it. But sometimes you look at nice compositions and you can just kind of understand that there's some sort of proportion and balance and geometry to the scenes. So once again, guys, don't get too nerdy about this, but ultimately, one thing I want you guys to really think about in your photography is think outside the box.
Okay.
Because this is probably my biggest epiphany in photography, because if you're looking through the camera, the viewfinder here, right?
Yeah.
You think only life exists within the viewfinder, but in reality, there's so much life outside the viewfinder. And even here, you can see there's this geometry of the curve outside the frame. So one thing you guys could encourage people is that, you know, when you're taking pictures, don't just look through the viewfinder. Sometimes keep both eyes open to see the scene outside and around you, entering the scene. So with like
That's
cameras,
another good thing about this camera, because the viewfinder is eccentric.
Yeah.
oh,
You can look through it and have both eyes
yeah,
open.
have both eyes
So
open.
you can see somebody moving in the screen and just
Yeah,
shoot.
definitely. You gotta keep both. You can
Must
definitely when
be
you're shooting,
Yeah.
Yeah,
keep both eyes open.
Yeah.
So having people enter the scene exit,
Yeah.
or just reminding people to every once in a while put the camera down and don't just get lost
Stop.
into the viewfinder.
Yeah.
Remember that photography isn't about just putting things in the viewfinder. It's about enjoying and experiencing life. So the cool thing with the Leica M cameras is that you can see outside the viewfinder and see people enter the scene. So ultimately, that's probably the biggest tips I'll give you guys in photography is that when you're shooting, think about the leading lines, the perspective, people going to enter the scene, and try to encourage your clients to do the fishing technique. Is be patient, wait. There's lots of nice bicyclists here in Amsterdam.
Sure.
So let's say you find a nice composition, a nice scene.
Yeah.
You essentially wait for the person to enter the scene. Even like one thing that Henri Cartier-Bresson did in his photography was he would
Jump
often
shot.
look for nice backgrounds and just wait for the right person to enter the scene. Because sometimes when you're shooting photos, you're not exactly sure.
You have the one with the water and the ladder where you see the guy making the jump.
Oh yeah, the guy with
That's-
the
But what he also did, and that's what you showed, and a lot of it, is that he always had a sort of a triangular composition.
yeah.
So instead of putting one in the center, you have a child here, a child there, a child there. So they have like,
Yeah,
a diagonal
definitely.
composition.
And you could even see, like, I've taken that umbrella lady and I've sketched it, so you could see once again, you could just see it abstract as images. So you can even tell your students or your clients, take pictures of your pictures with your iPhone, your iPad, or even a piece of paper, sketch it and draw it out, and figure out where you could see the leading lines. Or even keeping it simple.
Right.
Or even photographs I've shot.
Right.
This is a photo shot in
Yeah.
Tokyo. This is very simple. Like, if you think about it, you just have a subject, a simple background. I saw a simple, clean background in Tokyo, waited for somebody to enter, and then you have the nice leading line.
Yeah.
Another picture I shot of just two leading lines. And you can see having the reflection and the symmetry is essentially what makes the powerful image. Or even like pictures of Cindy, asking her to look up, looking for shapes and like kind of like circles and stuff like this. Or other
Be in
pictures.
Amsterdam after a good joint.
Yeah.
Looking up.
So like
Oh,
this is the
Oh, this
picture.
one.
Yeah. You can see these nice leading lines. So it's just kind of fun that.
And in this one, you also tilted the camera to
Yeah,
get that
and I
line.
shot very,
Because
very
it was a
low.
normal.
Yeah, and it has a slight tilt. And a lot of people
Okay.
they say it's not good because the photos always need to be straight. But I'm like, no, like it's fun to tilt it more because it makes it more dynamic and much more engaging.
Zo leuk. Oké.
Or even one thing I did was
Zo
I was in my hotel room, lying on the ground,
Dus daar weer bezig bent.
I held my leg up.
Ja, maar
And then took photos of my leg. So you can see it also fits the diagonal
Oh, die kan ik
line.
raden.
Ja, ik kan het wel. Dat je
If I take a screenshot of
met
this,
deze
right?
benadering doet, of je de foto's naar andere
You know, actually, the
Ja,
photographer
misschien
for
toch
Bill
eens
Grant,
branding met...
Ja.
Ja, maar je kijk je naar die...
it reminds me a little bit.
Ja,
Oh,
maar
yeah.
dat maakt
My
het een
inspiration
mooie
is Bill
foto's.
Oh, that's so
Maar,
nice.
Yes.
En,
So you can see if I send this to the
of het dan daadwerkelijk
Procreate, this is actually
Ja, ja, ja.
I have this app on iPad, which allows me to
Ja, het is zo
create
bij.
these kind of sketches.
Ja.
I can take the picture I shot my leg
this
here, right?
Procreate app.
Procreate app, right? You can see
Maar dat is cool.
if I create this golden triangle from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, and also, do you guys remember the diagonal line here?
Yeah.
So now you can see that your eye is generally brought
Ja,
to the
ja,
end.
ja, inderdaad. Ja.
So obviously not all the pictures you guys are going to do it with it here. Or if you could think about it, like even what I did was, this could almost kind of look like a Fibonacci spiral here too, right?
Ja,
So
ja.
obviously a lot of people aren't going to be thinking about this composition when
Nah.
you're shooting. But what I did was I tilted the camera and tried to get the leg in the bottom left corner. Or even like one thing I like to do in my compositions too. This is the original image that I shot here in Tokyo. You can see that I shot it from a very low angle. And I'm like, oh, why is the composition so nice? So essentially I started to build up the background and I created this composition of, you see all the really nice leading lines in the background. Then you kind of see, this is what happens when you put in the subject and all these other different...
Grappig, hè? Dat zei hij?
Pretty cool.
Procreate.
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 Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah. Or this is another good example too. This is actually the original image I see, right? So I'm just holding my camera and I'm holding an umbrella and I just tilted my camera and you can see I just tried to make the Dutch angle. I tilted my camera and it's very simple. Like, you know, we all carry umbrellas when it rains once in a while in Amsterdam, right? Sometimes.
Mostly in the weekends.
Sometimes.
So you can practice this, right? Doing the tilt. But one thing you could also see is that you see my hand, my thing here. It's all within here. And one thing I try to do to understand the composition is I actually started to just draw it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by drawing it, and this is the Procreate app I have on my iPad, you could kind of better understand what makes a simple dynamic composition. Yeah, it's a pretty cool, like even like the nice picture of Cindy. And you could just encourage people, this is another tip with composition, just finding a simple clean background, like a nice simple wall here. You can make a much more dynamic composition. And you can see all the different layers that I did to essentially paint Cindy. And this is why I like the idea of images, because I don't just see myself as a photographer, but like an image maker. Because, you know, whether it's a photograph or an image like this, it could be really, really exciting. Or even like this picture of Cindy here. This is the original Cindy image. You can see, and then this is another tip you guys could tell your clients too, is that shooting from a very, very low angle using wide angle lens, you can make a much more dynamic image. Because if you look at this one by one, we could, oh, scary! Oh no, she's missing a face! Adding a little more. Yeah, so anyways, essentially I recommend all of you guys to think about the compositions from the side. Like even in terms of the, one thing you could also even encourage people to do is when they're shooting in bright light, let's say they're shooting with a CL or any other Leica camera, telling them to do minus exposure compensation. Because minus exposure compensation, you're able to create this much more dramatic lights and shadows. Almost out of battery? Or? Yeah. So, once again, you could create minimalist things here. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is color theory. So if you want to make nice pictures, red against green, there's that thing called Heineken. Just think Heineken or think Christmas.
Oh, okay.
The yellow versus blue. Where do you guys buy your furniture?
IKEA.
No. Or black and white, right? And how we love photography. So think about other ways you guys could oppose those two colors to make for much more.
There's a complementary colors.
Yeah, so these are complementary colors.
Yeah.
And also another way they call it the opponent-based theory in colors. Because these two colors are like opponents fighting, right? So yeah, this is just a quick basic overview. So once again, to reiterate what we talked about, is the first and foremost, when you're shooting street photos or photos in general, think about the leading lines, think about the fishing technique, that you're just patient and you wait for the right person to enter the scene, and then you could take some LSD and you could make some stuff like this. Also, when you're shooting photos, think about essentially adding they call this the golden triangle to your compositions, adding more diagonals, and just put your subject not in the corner but there. And probably the last thing is, I guess just think about colors, opposing different colors. and also just kind of reminding yourself to, just think of yourself to be a visual artist, to play, to sometimes when shooting, compose intuitively, but afterwards sit down at home, use tracing paper or the Procreate iPad app to analyze your compositions, to figure out essentially why the pictures work, right? So that's all I have for now. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.